The Israel-Palestine conflict is a complex story, one that has spanned centuries and involves deep-seated historical, religious and cultural ties. It is deeply rooted in history, with both sides holding on to their ancient claims and narratives. Both Jews and Palestinians claim the same land, each with their own historical and emotional connections. For Jews, it is the biblical land of Israel, a place promised to them in their sacred texts. This land holds deep religious significance, being the site of many events described in the Torah. It is a connection to their heritage, a link to their ancestors and their faith. Palestinians also view the land as their own, a place where their families have lived for generations. They are the indigenous inhabitants with a rich history and culture that is deeply intertwined with the land. They have lived there for centuries, cultivating the land and building their communities. In the late 19th century, a movement called Zionism emerged, driven by the desire to establish a Jewish homeland. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to the late 19th century, when Jewish Zionist movements began advocating for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in the region of historic Palestine. This coincided with the growing Arab nationalist movement, which sought to establish an independent Arab state in the same region. Over the course of the 20th century, the conflict has evolved into a multifaceted struggle, involving political, military and social dimensions. The region has been the site of numerous wars, uprisings and failed peace negotiations, with both sides making competing claims and experiencing deep-seated grievances. Today, the conflict remains unresolved, with the status of the disputed territories of the West Bank, Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem being at the heart of the ongoing tensions. The quest for a sustainable peace agreement has proven elusive, with both sides unwilling to compromise on their core demands. The early Zionist movement and the Ottoman Empire. The origins of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be traced back to the late 19th century, when the Zionist movement began to gain momentum. Zionism was a Jewish nationalist movement that sought to establish a Jewish homeland in the region of historic Palestine, which was then under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The Zionist movement was inspired by the growing tide of anti-Semitism in Europe, as well as the desire of the Jewish people to have a secure and independent state. In 1897, the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland, where the goal of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine was formally declared. During this time, the Arab population of Palestine was also becoming increasingly nationalistic, with the growing Arab nationalist movement seeking to establish an independent Arab state in the region. The competing claims and aspirations of the Zionist and Arab nationalist movements would ultimately lead to the emergence of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This movement sought to create a Jewish state in Palestine, a land they believed was rightfully theirs. Zionism gained support in the 20th century, especially as Jews faced increasing persecution in Europe. The horrors of the Holocaust intensified this support as the need for a safe haven became more urgent. Jews sought refuge and a homeland where they could live in peace and security. However, this desire clashed with the Palestinian Arabs, who were already living in Palestine and had their own claims to the land. They were already living in Palestine. Their displacement seemed inevitable, leading to tensions and hostilities. These conflicting claims fueled the conflict, as both sides fought for their right to the land. Religious and historical narratives intensified these claims, making compromise difficult. The Zionist dream of a homeland was at odds with Palestinian existence, creating a deep and enduring conflict. This created a volatile situation, with both sides unwilling to relinquish their claims. The stage was set for decades of conflict, a struggle that continues to this day with no easy resolution in sight. After World War I, the League of Nations gave Britain control of Palestine. This was called the British Mandate. Britain was tasked with balancing the needs of both Jews and Arabs. 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, which expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This declaration was made during World War I, when the British were seeking to gain the support of the Zionist movement in their war efforts against the Ottoman Empire. Following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in 1918, the region of Palestine came under British control, with the League of Nations granting the United Kingdom a mandate to administer the territory. The British Mandate period, which lasted from 1920 to 1948, was marked by increasing tensions and violence between the Jewish and Arab populations. During this time, the Jewish population in Palestine grew rapidly as a result of increased Jewish immigration. This influx of Jewish settlers, combined with the British government's policies that were perceived as favouring the Zionist movement, fueled growing resentment and resistance among the Arab population. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the establishment of Israel. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan that would divide the British Mandate of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. The plan was accepted by the Zionist leadership, but rejected by the Arab states, leading to the outbreak of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The war resulted in a victory for the newly established State of Israel, which declared its independence on May 14, 1948. However, the war also led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled or were forced from their homes. This event, known as the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, is a pivotal moment in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The 1948 war also led to the division of historic Palestine, with Israel controlling the majority of the territory, while Jordan took control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt gained control of the Gaza Strip. The 1967 Six-Day War and the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. In 1967, another major conflict erupted between Israel and its Arab neighbours, known as the Six-Day War. This war resulted in a decisive Israeli victory, with Israel capturing the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip by Israel following the Six-Day War has been a central aspect of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict ever since. Israel's control over these territories and the continued expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank have been a major source of tension and conflict. The First Intifada and the Oslo Accords. In the late 1980s, the Palestinian population in the occupied territories began a large-scale uprising against the Israeli occupation, known as the First Intifada. The Intifada, which lasted until the early 1990s, involved a wide range of civil disobedience and non-violent resistance tactics, as well as occasional outbursts of violence. The First Intifada brought global attention to the plight of the Palestinian people and put pressure on the Israeli government to engage in peace negotiations. This led to the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993, which were intended to be the first step towards a comprehensive peace settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. The Oslo Accords established the Palestinian National Authority, PNA, as a governing body for the Palestinian territories and granted the Palestinians limited self-governance in certain areas of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. However, the accords did not resolve the core issues of the conflict, such as the status of Jerusalem, the future of Israeli settlements, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees. The Second Intifada and the Second Lebanon War. The fragile peace process of the 1990s broke down in the early 2000s, leading to the outbreak of the Second Intifada, also known as the Al-Aqsa Intifada. This uprising, which lasted from 2000 to 2005, was marked by a wave of suicide bombings and other acts of violence carried out by Palestinian militant groups against Israeli civilians. The Israeli government responded with a series of military operations, including the construction of a separation barrier between Israel and the West Bank. This period of violence and heightened security measures further eroded trust between the two sides and made the prospects for a peaceful resolution to the conflict even more elusive. In 2006, another conflict erupted between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, known as the Second Lebanon War. This conflict, which lasted for 34 days, resulted in significant casualties on both sides and further destabilized the regional geopolitical landscape. The Gaza Wars and the ongoing occupation. In the years following the Second Intifada, The situation in the Gaza Strip has remained a flashpoint of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In 2005, Israel withdrew its settlements and military presence from the Gaza Strip, but it has maintained a blockade and tight control over the movement of people and goods in and out of the territory. This has led to the rise of the Hamas movement, a Palestinian Islamist organization that has taken control of the Gaza Strip and engaged in armed conflict with Israel. Since 2008, there have been three major military confrontations between Israel and Hamas, known as the Gaza Wars, which have resulted in significant loss of life and further entrenched the conflict. This proved to be a near impossible task. Tensions soared, violence erupted, Jewish immigration increased. This alarmed the Arab population. In 1947, the UN proposed a partition plan. This plan divided Palestine. Two states were created, one Jewish, one Arab. Jewish leaders accepted the plan. Arab leaders rejected it. They saw it as unjust. It violated their rights. The situation worsened. In 1948, war broke out. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War was a turning point. Israel won a decisive victory. Israel gained more land than the UN plan allocated. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled. They became refugees. Neighboring Arab countries struggled to absorb them. This displacement is known as the Nakba, or catastrophe by Palestinians. It remains a source of pain and anger. The Six-Day War of 1967 reshaped the Middle East. Israel's victory was swift and decisive. They captured the West Bank. East Jerusalem fell under their control. The Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights were also taken. This victory solidified Israel's control. However, it fueled Palestinian resentment. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza began. Settlements were built. This became a major obstacle to peace. The war had regional implications. The Arab world was in shock. The Palestinian issue gained global attention. The war's legacy still shapes the conflict today. Section 5. Hamas, a new force in the conflict. Peace attempts in the decades after 1967 faltered. The Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, emerged. Yasser Arafat became its leader. It was recognized as the voice of the Palestinian people. However, a new force arose in Gaza, Hamas. Hamas rejected negotiations. They called for Israel's destruction. This stance complicated the peace process. Hamas gained support amongst Palestinians. They were disillusioned with the PLO. Israeli occupation continued. Hamas capitalized on this frustration. Section 6. The Oslo Accords, a glimmer of hope, dashed. The Oslo Accords offered a glimmer of hope in the 1990s. A time when the world was yearning for peace in the Middle East. These historic agreements were signed by Israel and the PLO, marking a significant moment in the quest for peace. They aimed for a two-state solution, envisioning a future where both Israelis and Palestinians could coexist peacefully. As part of the accords, the Palestinian Authority was created, granting Palestinians limited self-governance. This self-governance applied to parts of the West Bank and Gaza, areas long contested and fraught with tension. The Oslo Accords were hailed as a breakthrough, a beacon of hope in a region plagued by decades of conflict. They offered a path to peace, a roadmap that many believed could finally end the hostilities. However, this optimism soon began to fade. Key issues such as borders, security, and the rights of refugees were not fully addressed in the accords. The status of Jerusalem, a city sacred to many, remained unresolved, further complicating the peace process. The fate of Palestinian refugees, displaced for decades, was left unclear, leaving many in limbo. Additionally, Israeli settlements in the West Bank were not dismantled, creating further friction. Implementing the accords proved difficult, with both sides facing significant challenges and opposition. Both sides accused each other of violations, and trust, a crucial element for peace, eroded rapidly. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 dealt a devastating blow to the peace process. Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister and a key architect of the accords, was killed by a Jewish extremist, shattering hopes for a swift resolution. Section 7. Violence and stalemate, a cycle of suffering. The Israel-Palestine conflict has been a long-standing issue, marked by repeated cycles of violence and failed attempts at peace. And the ongoing conflict in Gaza continue to be central issues in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The expansion of Israeli settlements, the restrictions on the movement of Palestinians, and the lack of progress in the peace process have all contributed to the continuation of the conflict. Attempts at peace negotiations and the two-state solution. Throughout the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there have been numerous attempts to negotiate a peaceful settlement between the two sides. The most prominent of these efforts was the Oslo Accords, which laid the groundwork for a two-state solution, with the establishment of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. However, the failure of the Oslo process and the subsequent outbreak of the Second Intifada have made the prospects for a two-state solution increasingly challenging. Both sides have continued to make competing claims and demands and have been unwilling to compromise on core issues such as the status of Jerusalem, the future of Israeli settlements, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees. Despite the difficulties, the two-state solution remains the most widely accepted framework for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The international community, including the United Nations and various regional and global powers, has consistently endorsed the two-state solution as the preferred path towards a lasting peace. Ongoing challenges and the prospects for peace. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues to be one of the most intractable and complex geopolitical conflicts in the world. The unresolved issues of land, identity, and security have perpetuated a cycle of violence and mistrust, making it increasingly difficult to achieve a sustainable peace agreement. Some of the key challenges that have hindered progress towards a resolution include: 1. The expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, which has been viewed by the international community as a violation of international law and a major obstacle to the two-state solution. 2. The ongoing blockade and restrictions on the movement of people and goods in the Gaza Strip, which has contributed to the deterioration of the humanitarian situation and fueled resentment and radicalization among the Palestinian population. 3. The political divisions within the Palestinian leadership, with the ongoing rivalry between the Fatah and Hamas factions, which has undermined the ability of the Palestinians to present a united front in negotiations. 4. The shifting political landscape in Israel, with the rise of right-wing and nationalist political parties that have been less willing to make concessions for peace. 5. The involvement of regional and global powers, such as the United States, Russia, and various Arab states, whose competing interests and agendas have often complicated the peace process. Despite these challenges, there have been occasional glimmers of hope and progress in the quest for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. In recent years, there have been renewed efforts by the international community to revive the peace process, including the 2020 Trump administration's Peace to Prosperity plan and the ongoing diplomatic efforts of the European Union and other key players. Ultimately, the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will require a comprehensive and balanced approach that addresses the core issues of the conflict, respects the legitimate aspirations of both sides, and creates a sustainable framework for lasting peace and coexistence. This will require significant political will, compromises, and a commitment to addressing the deep-seated grievances and historical traumas that have fueled the conflict for generations. The 21st century saw continued violence. Negotiations failed repeatedly, leaving both sides entrenched in their positions and unable to find common ground. The Second Intifada began in 2000, a significant uprising that changed the dynamics of the conflict. This Palestinian uprising resulted in thousands of casualties. Positions hardened, and the hope for peace seemed to fade further away. In response to the violence, Israel built a separation barrier in the West Bank, a controversial measure that sparked international debate. It aimed to stop terrorism and protect its citizens from attacks. Palestinians saw it as a land grab, a unilateral move by Israel to dictate borders and control more territory. They felt Israel was dictating borders unilaterally. Gaza's situation worsened, with living conditions deteriorating rapidly. In 2007, Hamas took control of Gaza, further complicating the political landscape. Israel responded with a blockade, restricting goods and aid, which led to severe shortages and humanitarian crises. Fighting between Israel and Hamas was frequent, with both sides suffering casualties and destruction. The years 2008 to 2009, 2012 and 2014 saw major conflicts, each more devastating than the last. Gaza suffered immense destruction and loss of life. Each conflict deepened mistrust and animosity. Peace seemed increasingly distant as the cycle of suffering continued with no end in sight. Section 8. The world reacts, international perspectives and peace efforts. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a global concern. The United States is a strong ally of Israel. It has often mediated peace talks. However, this unwavering support draws criticism. Some argue it prevents a balanced approach. The European Union, Russia and China are also involved. They engage in diplomatic efforts. However, the situation is complex. Deeply held positions make a solution elusive. The geopolitical landscape adds to the difficulty. The United Nations has passed numerous resolutions. They condemn violence. They call for a two-state solution. However, these resolutions are often ignored. Their impact on the ground is limited. Section 9. The moral weight ethical concerns in the conflict. The Israel-Palestine conflict raises ethical questions. These go beyond politics and history. The conflict's impact is undeniable. Ordinary people suffer. This forces us to confront the human cost. Moral dilemmas come to the forefront. Justice is at the heart of the conflict. Both Israelis and Palestinians seek it. Each side believes in their cause. Each side carries historical grievances. These clashing narratives make common ground difficult to find. Generations have endured suffering and mistrust. Section 10. Scars of trauma. The psychological toll of enduring conflict. Reconciliation requires addressing psychological wounds. Both populations bear these scars. Trauma is passed down through generations. A cycle of fear, anger, and resentment takes root. Breaking this cycle is crucial. Empathy is essential. Understanding the other side's pain is vital. Acknowledging this pain is a step towards healing. Only then can the cycle of trauma be broken. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a complex and multifaceted struggle that has its roots in the late 19th century and has evolved over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries. The competing claims and aspirations of the Zionist and Arab nationalist movements, combined with the geopolitical dynamics of the region, have made the conflict one of the most intractable and protracted conflicts in the world. Despite numerous attempts at peace negotiations and the international community's consistent support for a two-state solution, the conflict remains unresolved, with both sides unwilling to compromise on their core demands. The ongoing occupation of the West Bank, the blockade of the Gaza Strip, and the expansion of Israeli settlements have all contributed to the continuation of the conflict and the erosion of trust between the two sides. As the conflict enters its second century, the prospects for a peaceful resolution remain uncertain, but the imperative for a just and sustainable solution remains as urgent as ever. Addressing the root causes of the conflict, respecting the legitimate aspirations of both sides, and creating a framework for lasting peace and coexistence will require significant political will, compromise, and a commitment to addressing the deep-seated grievances and historical traumas that have fueled the conflict for generations.